Picture this. Deep in the German wilderness on a rain-soaked September morning in the year 9 AD, three of Rome's finest legions, 20,000 of the most disciplined, battle-hardened warriors the world had ever seen, are marching confidently through dense forest paths. These aren't just any soldiers. These are the XVII, XIX, and XIX Legions. Veterans of countless victories, men who've conquered nations and toppled kings. But what they don't know, what their commander Publius Quinctilius Varus doesn't know, is that they're walking directly into the most devastating trap in military history. In just 3 days, all 20,000 will be dead. The legions will be completely annihilated, and the shock of this catastrophic defeat will echo through the halls of Rome for centuries. But here's the truly incredible part. It wasn't superior numbers that destroyed them. It wasn't better weapons or advanced tactics. No. Rome's greatest military disaster was orchestrated by one man, a man they trusted completely. A man who had lived among them, learned their secrets, and earned their respect. His name was Arminius, and what he did in those dark German woods would change the course of history forever. Here's what you need to understand about Rome in 9 AD. This wasn't the declining empire you might imagine from movies. This was Rome at its absolute peak, a military juggernaut that seemed utterly unstoppable. For over 4 centuries, Roman legions had been expanding the empire's borders with mechanical precision. They'd conquered the Mediterranean. They'd crushed Carthage. They'd subdued Gaul under Julius Caesar. Every enemy who dared challenge Rome had been systematically destroyed or absorbed into the empire. The Roman war machine was terrifying in its efficiency. Picture 20,000-man legions, when each one a perfectly organized killing force, every soldier trained for years in weapons, tactics, and engineering. They didn't just fight battles. They built roads, constructed fortified camps every single night, and operated siege engines that could level entire cities. And leading these unstoppable legions, generals who'd studied warfare since childhood, men bred for conquest and glory. By 9 AD, Rome controlled everything from Britain to the Euphrates River. The Mediterranean had become quite literally a Roman lake. Citizens throughout the empire enjoyed unprecedented peace, prosperity, and technological advancement. But here's the thing about empires. They never know when to stop expanding. Emperor Augustus, the brilliant first emperor who'd transformed Rome from republic to empire, had one obsession: Germania. The vast, mysterious lands beyond the Rhine River, inhabited by fierce Germanic tribes who'd never known Roman rule. Now you might wonder, why did Augustus care so much about these German forests? After all, Rome already controlled the richest, most civilized parts of the known world. What could possibly be worth the massive cost and risk of conquering these barbarian lands? The answer was both strategic and personal. Germania represented the final piece of Augustus's vision for a perfect Roman world. If he could establish the empire's border at the Elbe River, deep in Germanic territory, Rome would have natural barriers protecting it from northern invasions for centuries to come. But there was something else, something more psychological. These Germanic tribes were among the few peoples who'd consistently resisted Roman dominion. They'd actually defeated Roman armies before, and that was absolutely unacceptable to Roman pride. You have to understand the Roman mindset. They genuinely believed they were destined to rule the world. Their gods had ordained it. Their military superiority proved it. Any people who resisted this divine destiny weren't just enemies. They were obstacles to the natural order itself. So Augustus launched the Germanic campaigns, and initially, they seemed to be working perfectly. Roman forces under generals like Drusus and Tiberius had won stunning victories against various Germanic tribes. They'd established fortified positions along the Rhine. They'd even pushed deep into Germanic territory, reaching the Elbe River itself. But here's where things get fascinating, and where our story really begins. The Romans discovered that conquering Germanic tribes in battle was one thing. Actually ruling them? That was something entirely different. These weren't Gauls or Spaniards who could be gradually Romanized through trade, infrastructure, and cultural assimilation. Germanic tribes were fiercely independent, deeply traditional, and absolutely determined to maintain their ancestral ways of life. So Rome tried a different approach. Instead of ruling through fear alone, they decided to create partnerships with Germanic nobles. They'd bring promising young Germanic warriors to Rome, educate them in Roman culture, and then send them back as allied leaders who could bridge both worlds. It was a brilliant strategy, and it might have worked, except for one crucial miscalculation. Among these young Germanic nobles was a prince of the Cherusci tribe named Arminius, and Augustus's advisors thought they'd found the perfect success story. Arminius had spent years in Rome. He'd learned Latin fluently. He'd studied Roman military tactics and political systems. He'd even served with distinction as an auxiliary commander in Roman armies, earning citizenship and equestrian rank, one of the highest honors Rome could bestow on a foreigner. To Romanize, Arminius was proof that their system worked. Here was a Germanic barbarian who'd been successfully civilized, educated, and integrated into Roman society. He could serve as a model for other tribal leaders. But what the Romans didn't understand, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that Arminius had been learning something else during his time in Rome. He'd been studying Roman weaknesses, memorizing their tactics, understanding exactly how their military machine operated, and deep in his heart, he'd never stopped being Germanic. The stage was set for one of the most shocking betrayals in human history. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because what's about to unfold is even more incredible than simple treachery. This is the story of how one man's genius, combined with Rome's own arrogance, created a military disaster so catastrophic that it literally changed the shape of European civilization. The main players were all in position. The trap was about to be set. But no one, not Augustus, not the Senate, not even the legions themselves, could have predicted what was coming. Trouble was brewing in the Germanic territories. But from Rome's perspective, everything looked perfectly under control. In 7 AD, Augustus appointed Publius Quinctilius Varus as governor of Germania. On paper, this seemed like an inspired choice. Varus came from one of Rome's most distinguished families. He'd successfully governed Syria for years, transforming it from a rebellious province into a stable, profitable part of the empire. Varus was exactly the kind of administrator Augustus loved. Methodical, experienced, and absolutely ruthless when necessary. In Syria, he'd crucified 2,000 rebels without hesitation. The message was clear: resist Rome and face annihilation. But here's the crucial detail that would prove fatal. Varus had succeeded in Syria because Syria was already a civilized urban society. The people there understood Roman concepts like taxation, administration, and imperial authority. They might resist Roman rule, but they comprehended what Rome represented. Germania, that was an entirely different world. When Varus arrived in Germanic territory, he immediately began implementing standard Roman provincial policies. He established regular taxation. He set up Roman courts with Roman law. He demanded tribute payments and began planning permanent Roman settlements. To Varus, this was simply good governance. He was bringing the benefits of Roman civilization to backward tribal peoples. Roads, law, order, prosperity. What more could they possibly want? But to the Germanic tribes, Varus's policies felt like cultural annihilation. You have to understand, these weren't people who lived in cities or understood centralized government. Germanic society was built around kinship groups, warrior culture, and fierce independence. The idea of paying taxes to foreign rulers, of settling legal disputes through Roman courts instead of tribal councils, of having their sons drafted into Roman armies, it was absolutely unthinkable. Tensions began escalating almost immediately. Small-scale revolts broke out across the region. Germanic warriors attacked Roman tax collectors and administrative officials. Entire tribes simply disappeared into the deep forests whenever Roman patrols approached. Varus responded the only way he knew how, with overwhelming force. He ordered punitive expeditions against rebellious tribes. He had suspected rebels publicly executed. He increased troop presence throughout the region and demanded hostages from tribal leaders as guarantees of good behavior. And here's where Arminius enters our story in earnest. By 9 AD, Arminius had returned to Germania and was serving as one of Varus's most trusted auxiliary commanders. Remember, this was a Germanic noble who'd proven his loyalty to Rome through years of faithful service. He spoke perfect Latin, understood Roman culture, and had demonstrated his military competence in previous campaigns. Varus genuinely liked and respected Arminius. In his letters back to Rome, he described Arminius as proof that the Germanic peoples could be successfully integrated into the empire. Here was a barbarian who'd embraced Roman civilization and was helping to spread it among his own people. But what Varus didn't realize was that Arminius was living a double life. By day, he served Rome faithfully, providing intelligence on Germanic tribal movements and helping plan Roman military operations. By night, he was secretly meeting with Germanic chieftains, building a vast conspiracy against Roman rule. And this wasn't just about military tactics. Arminius understood something that previous Germanic leaders had missed. You couldn't defeat Rome through simple tribal warfare. The Romans were too disciplined, too well-equipped, and too experienced. Any Germanic tribe that faced them in open battle would be systematically destroyed. But what if you could turn Rome's own strengths against them? Arminius had spent years studying how Roman armies operated. He knew their standard formations, their marching procedures, their camping routines. He understood exactly how Roman commanders thought and made decisions. More importantly, he'd identified a crucial Roman weakness: arrogance. Roman generals consistently underestimated their enemies because they'd won so many victories. They followed predictable tactical patterns because those patterns had always worked before. They trusted their allied commanders because, well, who would be foolish enough to betray the mighty Roman Empire? Arminius realized that if he could exploit this arrogance, if he could lure a Roman army into terrain where their superior discipline and equipment provided no advantage, he might actually achieve the impossible. He might defeat Rome. The conspiracy Arminius was building involved multiple Germanic tribes who'd never cooperated before. The Cherusci, the Marsi, the Chatti, the Bructeri, traditional enemies who shared only one thing in common: hatred of Roman rule. Convincing these tribes to work together required incredible diplomatic skill. Each had their own grievances against Rome, their own military traditions, and their own ideas about how to fight. But Arminius managed to forge them into a unified force through a combination of shared purpose and brilliant strategic planning. Here's what's absolutely incredible about this conspiracy. It remained completely secret for months, possibly years. Thousands of Germanic warriors were involved. Detailed military plans were developed. Weapons and supplies were secretly stockpiled. And Varus never suspected a thing. In fact, Varus was so confident in his control over Germania that he'd begun planning the next phase of Roman expansion. He wanted to push Roman authority even deeper into Germanic territory, establishing permanent settlements and transforming the region into a peaceful, prosperous province like Gaul or Spain. The irony is devastating. While Varus was dreaming of greater Roman triumphs, the man he trusted most was orchestrating Rome's greatest military disaster. But Arminius faced one enormous challenge. How do you lure 3 full Roman legions into the perfect killing ground? Roman armies didn't just wander randomly through enemy territory. They followed carefully planned routes, established secure camps every night, and maintained constant vigilance for potential threats. Getting them to march into a trap would require extraordinary deception. Arminius's solution was diabolically clever. In September of 9 AD, He approached Varus with reports of a distant tribal rebellion. According to Arminius, a Germanic tribe far to the north was refusing to pay Roman taxes and had attacked a Roman administrative post. The situation required immediate military intervention to prevent the rebellion from spreading. Varus saw this as a perfect opportunity to demonstrate Roman power. A quick campaign against rebellious barbarians would reinforce Rome's authority throughout the region and might even provide his legions with valuable combat experience. What could go wrong? Arminius volunteered to guide the Roman forces along the fastest route to the rebellious territory. He knew the local terrain intimately, he assured Varus. He could lead the legions through forest paths that would cut days off their travel time. Varus agreed immediately. Why wouldn't he? Arminius was a trusted ally, a proven military commander, and a reliable source of intelligence. The plan made perfect strategic sense, and that's when everything started to fall apart, though Varus wouldn't realize it until it was far too late. You can imagine how Arminius must have felt as he watched Varus make this fateful decision. Years of careful planning were about to come to fruition. The trap was set. The Roman legions, symbols of imperial invincibility, were about to march willingly into their own destruction. But the real genius of Arminius's plan wasn't just the initial deception. It was what happened next. Because getting the Romans to enter the forest was only the beginning. The truly devastating part of the trap was yet to be sprung. What I'm about to tell you sounds impossible, but it's completely true. Over the next 3 days, Arminius would demonstrate military genius that rivals any commander in history. He was about to prove that even the mighty Roman Empire could be outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and utterly destroyed by someone who understood their weaknesses better than they understood themselves. Each decision brought them closer to the inevitable. The moment of truth had arrived, September 8th, 9 AD, and Varus's army is preparing to march toward what he believes is a simple punitive expedition against rebellious Germanic tribes. Picture the scene. 20,000 Roman soldiers moving with mechanical precision through their morning routines. These are the XVIII and XIX Legions, elite forces that have never known true defeat. Each man carries 60 pounds of equipment, armor, weapons, tools, and personal supplies. They're accompanied by auxiliary troops, cavalry units, and hundreds of camp followers, including families, merchants, and servants. This isn't just an army. It's a mobile city, a testament to Roman organizational genius. Varus is confident, almost cheerful, as he reviews the marching orders with his senior officers. The route Arminius has suggested will take them through dense forest terrain, but it promises to cut several days off their journey. The sooner they crush this rebellion, the sooner they can return to their comfortable winter quarters. Arminius stands beside Varus during these planning sessions, offering helpful suggestions about terrain features and potential camping sites. To every observer, he appears to be the perfect allied commander, knowledgeable, loyal, and eager to serve Roman interests. But here's what's absolutely incredible. While Arminius is calmly discussing logistics with Roman officers, Germanic warriors are already moving into position throughout the forest. Thousands of them, hidden in dense undergrowth, concealed behind fallen trees, waiting in ravines and elevated positions that overlook the forest paths. This isn't a spontaneous ambush. This is a meticulously planned military operation that's been months in the making. The Roman column begins moving at dawn. First come the auxiliary troops and cavalry, about 3,000 men spread across several miles of narrow forest path. Behind them march the legions themselves, their armor gleaming despite the misty morning air, their standards proudly displayed. Now, you might be wondering, didn't anyone suspect that something was wrong? Weren't there Roman scouts and advance guards who should have detected signs of enemy activity? Here's where Arminius's planning reveals its true brilliance. The Germanic warriors weren't just hiding randomly throughout the forest. They'd been positioned so carefully that Roman scouts would see exactly what they expected to see. Nothing unusual, Germanic peoples lived in these forests. It was perfectly normal to encounter individual hunters, woodcutters, or travelers along forest paths. What Roman scout would think twice about seeing a few Germanic men moving through their own territory? But those individual Germanic civilians were actually military commanders, observing Roman movements and relaying information to hidden warrior bands through prearranged signals. As the Roman column moves deeper into the forest, the terrain becomes increasingly challenging. The paths are narrow, forcing the usually tight Roman formations to stretch out over several miles. Dense trees and undergrowth limit visibility to just a few dozen yards in any direction. Perfect ambush country, but still nothing happens. The Romans march for hours without incident. If anything, the journey seems to be going better than expected. The forest paths are well maintained, the weather is holding, and they're making good time toward their destination. Varus rides near the front of the column, occasionally chatting with Arminius about local geography and tribal politics. In his letters, he would later describe this first day as uneventful but promising. How wrong he was, because while the Romans saw peaceful forests and clear paths, Arminius saw something entirely different. Every mile they advanced took them further from potential escape routes. Every turn in the path moved them deeper into carefully prepared killing zones. Every hour that passed brought more Germanic warriors into flanking positions. The trap was closing, and the Romans had no idea. That first night, the legions established their standard fortified camp, a remarkable feat of military engineering that the Romans could complete in just a few hours. Defensive walls, organized streets, command posts, supply areas. Even in hostile territory, they created a miniature Roman city. But here's what's genuinely chilling. While Roman soldiers were setting up their evening routines, Germanic warriors were silently surrounding the entire camp, not attacking, just watching, learning, preparing. Arminius moved freely between the Roman camp and the surrounding forest, ostensibly checking on local conditions and gathering intelligence about potential threats ahead. But what he was actually doing was coordinating the final stages of his master plan. The next morning, September 9th, brought ominous changes. Heavy clouds rolled in from the north. The air grew cold and damp. By mid-morning, a steady rain had begun falling, turning forest paths into muddy, treacherous passages. Roman soldiers grumbled about the weather, but they maintained their disciplined formations and continued marching. After all, they'd fought in worse conditions before. Rain was an inconvenience, not a serious tactical problem. Except, in this case, it was exactly what Arminius had been waiting for. The rain served multiple purposes in his plan. It limited visibility even further, making it nearly impossible for Romans to see potential threats in the dense underbrush. It muffled sounds, allowing Germanic warriors to move closer to the Roman column without being detected. Most importantly, it made the narrow forest paths increasingly difficult to navigate, forcing the Romans to slow their pace and spread their formations even thinner. Here's where it gets really interesting. Arminius began reporting concerning developments to Varus. According to his scouts, there were signs of increased Germanic military activity ahead. Nothing immediately threatening, but perhaps it would be wise to alter their routes slightly, taking paths that avoided potential trouble spots. Varus agreed to these route changes without hesitation. Why wouldn't he? Arminius was demonstrating exactly the kind of local expertise and loyal service that made him so valuable as an allied commander. But each route adjustment was actually leading the Roman column deeper into Arminius's trap. Now here's the thing. Some of Varus's subordinate officers were beginning to feel uneasy about the entire expedition. The weather was getting worse. The terrain was becoming increasingly difficult. And there were subtle signs that something might be wrong. A few officers reported seeing more Germanic civilians than usual along their route. Others noticed that the forest seemed unusually quiet. No bird songs, no normal woodland sounds, the kind of silence that often precedes violence. But when these concerns were brought to Varus, he dismissed them as typical military paranoia. Roman soldiers always found reasons to worry about potential threats. It was part of their training. But they were 3 full legions. Even if there were Germanic warbands in the area, what could a few hundred barbarian warriors possibly do against 20,000 disciplined Roman troops? Besides, Arminius had assured him that his own scouts had thoroughly reconnoitered the entire route. If there were serious threats, he would know about them. The tragic irony is overwhelming. Varus's trust in Arminius, his confidence in Roman military superiority, his dismissal of his officers' instincts, was about to cost him everything. Because on the afternoon of September 9th, as the Roman column struggled through increasingly muddy forest paths, Germanic signal fires began appearing on distant hilltops. The attack was about to begin. But wait, it gets even more incredible. Because what happened next wasn't just a simple ambush. What Arminius unleashed was something far more sophisticated and devastating than any Germanic military action in history. He was about to demonstrate that superior numbers and equipment mean nothing when you're fighting someone who knows exactly how to turn your strengths into fatal weaknesses. You know what? If you're as fascinated by this incredible story as I am, consider subscribing. It genuinely helps us bring more of these untold stories of empires, battles, and human drama to life. Trust me, the best part is still coming. Now, where were we? Oh, right, the moment that would change everything. Things were about to get much, much worse. September 9th afternoon. The Roman column is strung out across several miles of increasingly treacherous forest path. Rain is falling steadily now, turning the ground into a muddy quagmire that makes every step a struggle. And then it begins, not with a dramatic charge or battle cry. Instead, the attack starts with something far more terrifying: individual Roman soldiers simply beginning to disappear. A messenger riding between units vanishes without a trace. A small group of legionaries investigating strange sounds in the underbrush never returns. Supply wagon drivers at the rear of the column found dead with Germanic spears in their backs. This wasn't random violence. This was systematic terror, designed to create fear and confusion throughout the Roman ranks. Varus initially orders increased security and tighter formations, but here's the problem. The narrow forest paths make traditional Roman tactical responses almost impossible. You can't form proper battle lines when you're confined to single-file marching order. You can't use cavalry effectively when visibility is limited to 20 yards. You can't even communicate efficiently between different parts of your own army when they're spread across miles of winding forest trail. Every Roman strength was being systematically neutralized, and Arminius? He's still right there beside Varus, expressing concern about these unexpected attacks and offering helpful suggestions about defensive measures. The perfect ally, worried about Roman safety and eager to help solve the problem. But as the afternoon progresses, the isolated attacks become more frequent and more coordinated. Small groups of Germanic warriors appear suddenly from dense undergrowth, unleash volleys of spears and arrows at Roman formations, then disappear back into the forest before any effective counterattack can be organized. This is guerrilla warfare at its most sophisticated. And it's completely unlike anything the Romans have ever encountered. Traditional enemies, Gauls, Spaniards, even other Germanic tribes, had always fought the Romans in open battle. They'd form battle lines, charge courageously, and either win through superior numbers or die gloriously in defeat. That kind of warfare played to Roman strengths. Discipline, organization, and superior equipment could decide those battles. But this was something entirely different. By evening of September 9th, Roman casualties are mounting steadily. But they still haven't seen their main enemy. They're fighting shadows, phantoms who strike without warning and vanish before retaliation is possible. Varus orders the construction of a fortified camp, but even this routine operation becomes a nightmare. Germanic warriors harass the work parties, targeting officers and engineers with carefully aimed projectiles. Every attempt to establish defensive perimeters is met with hit-and-run attacks that fade away before Roman forces can respond effectively. For the first time in their military careers, these veteran legionaries are experiencing something unprecedented: fear. Now here's where Arminius reveals the true genius of his strategy. While the Romans are focused on defending against these constant small-scale attacks, he's using the chaos to implement the next phase of his plan. During the night, Germanic warriors begin systematically destroying the forest paths behind the Roman army. Trees are felled across the trails, temporary bridges are demolished, key landmarks are obliterated. The Romans don't realize it yet, but their escape route has just been cut off. September 10th dawns gray and wet. The rain has intensified into a steady downpour that turns the forest floor into a swamp and reduces visibility to almost nothing. Varus faces a crucial decision. Should they continue toward their original destination, hoping to fight through to open territory where Roman tactics can be more effective? Or should they turn back, retreating to their established bases along the Rhine? Here's the truly diabolical part of Arminius's trap. Either choice leads to disaster. If the Romans continue forward, they're moving deeper into carefully prepared ambush zones where thousands of Germanic warriors are waiting. If they retreat, they'll discover that their escape route has been systematically destroyed, forcing them to fight their way through obstacles while under constant attack. Arminius, still playing his role as loyal ally, recommends continuing forward. According to his intelligence, the tribal rebellion ahead is smaller than initially reported. If they can reach the rebellious village quickly, they can crush the uprising and return to safety before the weather gets worse. It's a reasonable recommendation from a trusted source. Varus decides to push forward. This is it, the moment we've been building to, as the Roman column resumes its march on September 10th. They're moving directly into the killing zone Arminius has spent months preparing. The forest path ahead leads through a narrow valley called the Teutoburg Forest, a name that will echo through history as the site of Rome's greatest military disaster. The terrain is perfect for ambush. Hills rise steeply on both sides of the valley, covered with dense forest that provides perfect concealment for attacking forces. The valley floor is marshy and broken by streams that force the Roman column to bunch up at key crossing points. And hidden throughout this terrain, somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 Germanic warriors, Arminius has achieved something unprecedented in Germanic military history. He's united traditional enemies in a common cause and coordinated them into a sophisticated fighting force capable of complex tactical operations. The Cherushi provide the core leadership and planning. The Marsi contribute their knowledge of forest warfare. The Chatti bring their reputation as fierce warriors. Dozens of smaller tribes provide additional manpower and local expertise. But here's what makes this alliance truly remarkable. They're not just fighting as individual tribal units. Arminius has organized them into a coordinated army with specific roles and objectives. Some warrior bands are positioned to attack the front of the Roman column, creating chaos and confusion. Others are hidden along the flanks, ready to strike at the stretched-out middle sections. Still more are waiting at key choke points, ready to block Roman retreat or advance. It's sophisticated military planning that rivals anything in Roman tactical manuals. As the Roman column enters the valley, the attacks intensify dramatically. What had been isolated harassment becomes sustained assault from multiple directions simultaneously. Roman soldiers find themselves fighting enemies they can barely see, in terrain that makes their traditional formations impossible to maintain. The famous Roman shield wall, the tactical formation that had conquered half the world, simply doesn't work when you're being attacked from elevated positions in dense forest. Legionaries trained for open-field combat struggle with an enemy that appears suddenly from behind trees, launches deadly projectiles, and then melts away before counterattacks can be organized. And the weather. The relentless rain is making everything worse. Roman equipment becomes waterlogged and heavy. Bowstrings stretch and lose their effectiveness. Footing becomes treacherous on muddy slopes and slippery rocks. Meanwhile, the Germanic warriors, fighting in their native terrain, equipped with weapons designed for forest warfare, maintain their tactical advantages. This is where the battle truly begins to turn into a slaughter. Roman officers desperately try to maintain unit cohesion, but the narrow valley terrain makes communication between different parts of the column almost impossible. Orders shouted from the front of the army can't be heard at the rear. Units become isolated from each other and have to fight independently without coordinated support. Varus himself is beginning to realize the true scope of the disaster unfolding around him. This isn't a simple tribal raid or spontaneous uprising. This is a carefully orchestrated military campaign designed specifically to destroy his entire army. But the most crushing realization is yet to come, because in the midst of this chaos, as Roman soldiers are dying by the hundreds and the legendary legions are being systematically torn apart, Arminius quietly disappears from the Roman command group. No dramatic announcement, no villainous speech. He simply vanishes into the forest, leaving behind only the growing recognition that Rome's most trusted Germanic ally has been their greatest enemy all along. The betrayal is complete, but the destruction, that's only just beginning. If you think that was intense, just wait. Because what happens over the next 24 hours will be remembered as one of the most complete military disasters in human history. The worst part? This was only the beginning. This is it, the moment we've been building to. September 10th, late afternoon. The Roman 17th, XVIII, and XIX Legions are trapped in a nightmare that defies every principle of warfare they've ever known. Varus is standing in the middle of what used to be one of Rome's most disciplined armies, and watching it disintegrate before his eyes. The realization of Arminius's betrayal has hit him like a physical blow. Everything. The route recommendations, the intelligence reports, the assurances about local security. All of it was carefully orchestrated deception. But there's no time for self-recrimination. Roman soldiers are dying and Varus needs to save what's left of his command. The problem is, traditional Roman battle tactics are completely useless in this situation. Picture this. 20,000 men strung out across miles of narrow forest path, under constant attack from enemies they can't see, in terrain that makes coordinated movement almost impossible. Units that should be supporting each other are separated by hundreds of yards of impassable undergrowth. Officers who should be directing tactical responses can't even communicate with their own soldiers. It's every military commander's worst nightmare. Varus orders his forces to break out of the valley, fighting their way toward higher ground where they might be able to form proper defensive positions. But here's where Arminius's planning reveals its true brilliance. Every potential escape route has been anticipated and blocked. Germanic warriors aren't just attacking randomly. They're herding the Roman forces deeper into the valley toward predetermined killing zones where the slaughter can be completed most efficiently. When Roman units try to climb the hills on either side of the valley, they discover that the slopes have been prepared with hidden obstacles, sharpened stakes, concealed pits, and carefully placed fallen trees that channel attacking forces into narrow corridors where Germanic spears and arrows can be most effective. When they try to retreat back toward the valley entrance, they find that the path has been blocked by massive tree barriers that would take hours to clear. Hours they don't have while under constant attack. And when they try to push forward toward the far end of the valley, well, that's where the largest concentration of Germanic warriors is waiting. Arminius has achieved something unprecedented. He's turned an entire valley into a single, massive trap. Now here's what's truly remarkable about the Germanic assault. It's not just mindless violence. This is coordinated military action that demonstrates sophisticated understanding of Roman weaknesses. The Germanic warriors are specifically targeting Roman officers. using their knowledge of Roman uniforms and rank insignia to identify and eliminate the men who provide tactical leadership. Every centurion killed creates chaos in an entire century. Every tribune eliminated disrupts coordination between multiple units. They're also focusing their attacks on Roman standard-bearers, the soldiers who carry the eagles and other military symbols that provide both practical navigation aids and psychological inspiration for Roman troops. Most devastatingly, they're systematically destroying Roman baggage trains and supply wagons. This isn't just about immediate tactical advantage. It's about ensuring that any Roman survivors will be left without food, medical supplies, or equipment necessary for long-term survival. This level of strategic thinking goes far beyond traditional Germanic warfare. Arminius has essentially created a Germanic army that fights like Romans, but with all the advantages of local terrain knowledge and guerrilla tactics. The psychological impact on Roman soldiers is catastrophic. These men have spent their entire military careers believing in Roman invincibility. They've conquered nations, defeated barbarian armies that outnumbered them 10-1, and seen their eagle standards planted on the battlefields of countless victories. Now they're being systematically butchered by the very people they considered inferior. The famous Roman discipline that had held together through decades of warfare begins to crack. Individual soldiers start abandoning their units, trying to save themselves through individual escape attempts. Others simply freeze in terror, unable to process the reality of what's happening around them. Some units maintain their cohesion and continue fighting with desperate courage, but they're isolated islands of resistance in a sea of chaos. By nightfall of September 10th, Roman casualties number in the thousands. Entire cohorts have been wiped out. The legendary XVIII Legion has virtually ceased to exist as an organized fighting force. Varus makes a desperate decision. They'll try to break out during the night, using darkness to conceal their movements and hopefully escape the Germanic trap. It's their last chance, but Arminius has anticipated this move as well. Throughout the night, Germanic warriors maintain pressure on the Roman positions, using hit-and-run attacks to prevent any organized retreat. More importantly, they use their superior knowledge of the terrain to stay ahead of Roman movements, ensuring that every potential escape route remains blocked. The Romans spend the entire night fighting their way through forest undergrowth, carrying their wounded and trying to maintain some semblance of military order. It's exhausting, terrifying work that leaves them even more vulnerable to the next day's assault. September 11th dawns with no improvement in the weather. If anything, the rain has gotten worse, turning streams into torrents and making every footstep a struggle through deep mud. The Romans have managed to move only a few miles during their night march, and they're still deep in hostile territory with no clear escape route. Worse, the Germanic attacks resume immediately, striking the exhausted Roman forces with renewed intensity. Now Arminius makes his final, devastating move. For 2 days, he's allowed hope to survive among the Roman ranks. Individual soldiers could still believe they might fight their way out. Officers could still imagine organizing successful counterattacks. Even Varus could still dream of somehow salvaging this disaster. But on September 11th, Arminius reveals the true scope of his planning. From every direction, north, south, east, and west, Germanic war horns sound simultaneously. Not the chaotic noise of individual tribal attacks, but the coordinated signals of a unified army executing a predetermined battle plan. Thousands of Germanic warriors emerge from concealment throughout the forest. Not scattered war bands, but organized military units moving with disciplined precision towards specific objectives. The Romans suddenly realize they're not facing random tribal raids. They're confronting a Germanic army that rivals their own legions in size, organization, and tactical sophistication. Here's what's absolutely incredible. Arminius has achieved what Roman military theorists considered impossible. He's created a barbarian army that can match Roman forces in coordination and discipline, while maintaining all the advantages of fighting in familiar terrain with superior mobility. The final assault is brutal and efficient. Germanic warriors pour down from the hillsides in coordinated waves, timing their attacks to hit different sections of the Roman column simultaneously. Roman soldiers find themselves fighting on multiple fronts at once, unable to form the defensive formations that might give them a chance of survival. The famous Roman gladius, the short sword that had conquered the Mediterranean, proves almost useless in dense forest combat against enemies armed with long spears and throwing weapons designed for woodland warfare. Roman armor, which provided excellent protection against traditional battlefield weapons, becomes a liability in the muddy, treacherous terrain. Germanic warriors can move faster, strike more quickly, and disappear into the undergrowth before heavily armored Romans can respond effectively. Unit after unit is overwhelmed and destroyed. The XIX Legion makes a final desperate stand on a small hill, forming the traditional Roman square with shields locked and spears outward. For a few hours, this defensive position holds against Germanic attacks, but they have no food, no water, and no hope of relief. When the Germanic forces set fire to the surrounding undergrowth, filling the Roman position with choking smoke, even this last bastion of resistance collapses. By midday of September 11th, organized Roman resistance has effectively ended. Individual soldiers and small groups continue fighting desperately, trying to reach safety or at least die with honor. Some Roman officers commit suicide rather than face capture and the humiliation of defeat. Others fight to the last man, determined to uphold the traditions of their legions even in death. Varus himself, well, his fate represents the ultimate symbol of this catastrophic defeat. Realizing that escape is impossible and capture would bring unbearable shame to his family name, Varus makes the final Roman choice. Rather than surrender to barbarian enemies, he falls on his own sword, dying alongside the soldiers he'd led into disaster. His last words, according to surviving accounts, were a prayer to the gods for forgiveness. Not for his tactical mistakes, but for failing to recognize the depth of Arminius's deception. The man who had trusted his Germanic ally completely had been betrayed absolutely. But here's the truly staggering part. The slaughter doesn't end with organized resistance. Over the next several hours, Germanic warriors systematically hunt down and kill every Roman survivor they can find. This isn't just military victory. It's the complete annihilation of 3 entire legions, 20,000 Roman soldiers, hundreds of officers, thousands of auxiliary troops, cavalry, and support personnel. Camp followers, families, merchants, everyone connected to Varus's army, all dead. The XVIII, Surunan, and Namananitsa legions, military units with centuries of proud history, veterans of countless victories, simply cease to exist. When the killing finally stops, the Teutoburg Forest has become a vast graveyard. Germanic warriors move methodically through the battlefield, stripping Roman bodies of weapons and armor, collecting military standards as trophies. But Arminius orders that the Roman eagles, the sacred symbols of legion identity, be treated with special significance. These aren't just war trophies. They're proof that Germanic warriors have achieved the impossible. They've destroyed Rome's supposedly invincible military machine. The psychological impact of this victory spreads like wildfire throughout Germania. Tribes that had been considering submission to Roman rule suddenly see an alternative. If Arminius could destroy 3 Roman legions, perhaps Germanic independence wasn't just a desperate dream. Within weeks, the entire Rhine frontier erupts in rebellion. Roman settlements are attacked and destroyed. Isolated garrisons are overwhelmed by Germanic forces inspired by the Teutoburg victory. Augustus's dream of expanding the empire to the Elbe River dies in those German forests along with Varus's legions. But the consequences, the true historical impact of what Arminius accomplished, that extends far beyond immediate military considerations. Because this battle didn't just stop Roman expansion eastward, it fundamentally altered the future of European civilization in ways that are still visible today. In the silence that followed, Rome itself seemed to hold its breath. When news of the Teutoburg disaster finally reached Augustus in early October, the emperor's reaction was, well, it's become one of the most famous emotional outbursts in Roman history. Augustus, the man who had transformed Rome from a fractured republic into a stable empire, who had brought peace and prosperity to millions of people, reportedly spent days wandering through his palace, beating his head against walls and screaming, "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions!" But this wasn't just personal grief over lost soldiers. Augustus understood immediately that Arminius had achieved something far more devastating than a simple military victory. He had shattered the myth of Roman invincibility. For centuries, Rome's power had rested on a fundamental psychological principle. Resistance to Roman rule was futile. Individual battles might be won or lost, but Roman victory was inevitable. The empire's enemies could delay Roman conquest, but they couldn't prevent it. Arminius had proven this assumption catastrophically wrong. Germanic tribes weren't just celebrating a military victory. They were celebrating proof that Rome could be defeated, that Roman legions could be destroyed, that the mighty empire was not invincible after all. The immediate political consequences in Rome were severe. Augustus canceled all public festivities and entertainment. The Senate went into emergency session. Panic buying emptied grain stores as citizens feared Germanic armies might march on Rome itself. But the strategic implications were even more profound. Augustus immediately abandoned all plans for expanding Roman territory beyond the Rhine River. The frontier that had been intended as a temporary staging area for further conquest became a permanent defensive barrier. Think about what this means. If Varus's legions had succeeded in establishing Roman control over Germania, European history would have been completely different. Germanic tribes would have been Romanized, just like the Gauls and Spaniards. They would have adopted Roman law, Roman culture, Roman religion, and Latin language. The entire course of Western civilization would have been altered. Instead, the Rhine River became the permanent boundary between Roman and Germanic Europe. On one side, you had Roman provinces with cities, roads, law courts, and Mediterranean culture. On the other side, you had independent Germanic tribes maintaining their traditional ways of life. This division would influence European development for centuries. When the Roman Empire eventually fell, it was Germanic tribes, still fiercely independent, still maintaining their warrior culture, who inherited much of Western Europe. The Franks, the Goths, the Vandals, the Angles, and Saxons, all descendants of peoples who had remained free from Roman rule thanks partly to Arminius's victory. The languages we speak today reflect this division. French, Spanish, and Italian developed from Latin because those regions were thoroughly Romanized. German, English, and Scandinavian languages retained their Germanic roots because those peoples successfully resisted Roman conquest. Even our concepts of law and government show this influence. Roman legal traditions dominated in Southern and Western Europe, while Germanic customs influenced political development in Northern Europe. Sound familiar? It should, because we're still living with the consequences of what happened in the Teutoburg Forest over 2,000 years ago. But here's what's truly remarkable about this historical impact. Arminius himself probably never imagined the full scope of what he was accomplishing. From his perspective, he was fighting for immediate Germanic independence from Roman rule. He wanted to preserve his people's traditional way of life and protect their ancestral lands from foreign occupation. He succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. But he also created something he never intended. The victory in the Teutoburg Forest didn't just preserve Germanic independence, it established Germania as Rome's permanent enemy. For the next 4 centuries, the Rhine frontier would be one of the most militarized borders in the ancient world. Rome stationed 8 full legions along the Rhine River, nearly half of the entire imperial army. just to contain the Germanic threat that Arminius's victory had unleashed. This massive military commitment drained Roman resources, prevented expansion in other directions, and ultimately contributed to the empire's eventual decline. What Caesar couldn't have known was that his brilliant victory would eventually help destroy the very civilization he was fighting against. The irony is devastating. By defeating Rome so completely, Arminius ensured that Rome would never again trust Germanic peoples or attempt peaceful integration of Germanic territories. Instead of facing gradual Romanization, which might have preserved some aspects of Germanic culture while providing the benefits of Roman technology and organization, Germanic tribes found themselves in permanent conflict with an increasingly militarized Roman frontier. This meant centuries of warfare, raids and counter-raids that devastated communities on both sides of the Rhine. It meant that Germanic societies remained primarily warrior cultures, focused on military strength rather than economic or cultural development. And ultimately it meant that when Germanic tribes finally did overrun the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century AD, they lacked the administrative and cultural tools necessary to maintain the sophisticated civilization they'd inherited. The collapse of Roman Britain, the fragmentation of Gaul, the decline of urban life throughout Western Europe. All of these developments can be traced back, at least partially, to the permanent divide between Roman and Germanic Europe that Arminius's victory created. But we shouldn't romanticize the alternatives. Roman rule, for all its benefits, was also fundamentally based on conquest, slavery, and cultural imperialism. The Germanic peoples who preserved their independence maintained something valuable that would have been lost under Roman domination: their emphasis on personal freedom, their traditions of local self-government, their warrior codes that valued individual courage over institutional authority. These cultural elements would eventually contribute to medieval concepts of chivalry, Renaissance ideas about individual rights, and modern democratic principles. So when we try to evaluate the historical significance of the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, we're really asking a fundamental question about the nature of civilization itself. Was Arminius a hero who preserved Germanic freedom and cultural diversity? Or was he the architect of centuries of unnecessary warfare that prevented the benefits of Roman civilization from reaching Northern Europe? The honest answer is probably both. His victory preserved something essential about human freedom and cultural independence, but it also created divisions that would haunt Europe for centuries. Looking back across the centuries, it's almost impossible to fully comprehend the long-term impact of what happened in those German forests during 3 September days in 9 AD. Arminius had set out to win a single battle against Roman occupiers. Instead, he'd fundamentally altered the trajectory of Western civilization. But here's what's fascinating about historical memory. Arminius himself was largely forgotten for over 1,500 years. Roman historians, understandably, preferred not to dwell on their greatest military disaster. They mentioned the Battle of Teutoburg Forest as briefly as possible, focusing instead on subsequent Roman victories and the eventual stabilization of the Rhine frontier. Germanic peoples preserved some memory of the victory in their oral traditions. But without written records, the specific details of Arminius's achievement gradually faded into legend. It wasn't until the Renaissance, when scholars began rediscovering and translating ancient texts, that the full story of the Teutoburg battle began to emerge. And even then, it took several more centuries for historians to recognize its true historical significance. The real revival of interest in Arminius came in the 19th century, when German nationalism was emerging as a major political force. German intellectuals and politicians seeking historical precedents for German unification and independence seized on Arminius as a symbol of Germanic resistance to foreign domination. They renamed him Hermann der Cheruskerfürst, Hermann, Prince of the Cherusci, and celebrated him as the first great German hero. Massive monuments were built in his honor. Epic poems and operas told romanticized versions of his story. School children learned to revere him as the founder of German national identity. This nationalist interpretation of Arminius's legacy reached its peak in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when German militarists used his example to justify aggressive expansion and racial theories about Germanic superiority. The irony is overwhelming. Arminius, who had fought to preserve local tribal independence, was transformed into a symbol of centralized German nationalism. The man who had used intelligence and diplomacy to unite diverse peoples against a common threat became a poster child for military aggression and ethnic supremacy. Modern historians take a much more nuanced view of Arminius's achievements and legacy. We recognize his genuine military genius, his ability to unite traditional enemies, his sophisticated understanding of Roman weaknesses, his brilliant tactical planning that turned Roman strengths against them. We acknowledge the legitimate grievances that motivated Germanic resistance to Roman occupation: the taxation, the cultural imperialism, the threat to traditional ways of life. But we also understand the complex consequences of his victory, both positive and negative, and we resist simplistic interpretations of his legacy. Perhaps the most important lesson from Arminius's story is about the unpredictability of historical consequences. When he planned his attack on Varus's legions, Arminius was focused on immediate, local objectives. He wanted to drive Roman occupiers out of Germanic territory and preserve tribal independence. He succeeded completely in these immediate goals. But his success also set in motion historical forces that he never anticipated and probably wouldn't have approved of: the permanent militarization of the Rhine frontier, the centuries of warfare between Roman and Germanic peoples, the eventual collapse of Western Roman civilization, and the fragmentation of European unity. None of these consequences were part of Arminius's original plan. They emerged from the complex interaction between his victory and broader historical forces that no individual could have controlled or predicted. This teaches us something crucial about the nature of historical change. Even the most brilliant leaders, even the most successful military campaigns can't determine their own long-term significance. History is shaped by the interaction between individual decisions and vast impersonal forces: geography, economics, technology, culture, that operate beyond any single person's control. Arminius made his choices based on the information available to him and the values that motivated him. Those choices were rational, even brilliant, given his circumstances and objectives. But the ultimate historical impact of those choices was determined by factors that no one in 9 AD could have foreseen. So what lessons can we draw from this incredible story for our own time? First, the importance of understanding your enemy. Arminius succeeded because he took the time to genuinely understand Roman culture, Roman military tactics, and Roman psychology. He didn't just oppose Rome. He studied Rome intensively enough to identify its crucial weaknesses. Second, the power of strategic thinking over immediate tactical advantages. Arminius didn't defeat Rome through superior weapons or larger armies. He defeated Rome by creating a situation where Roman advantages became Roman vulnerabilities. Third, the significance of unity among diverse groups facing a common threat. Arminius's greatest achievement wasn't military, it was diplomatic. He convinced traditional enemies to work together toward shared objectives. But perhaps the most important lesson is about the complexity of historical judgment. We can admire Arminius's courage, his intelligence, and his success in defending his people's independence. We can recognize the legitimate grievances that motivated Germanic resistance to Roman rule. At the same time, we can acknowledge that his victory contributed to centuries of warfare and instability that caused immense human suffering. Historical figures aren't simply heroes or villains. They're human beings making difficult decisions under complex circumstances, often with consequences they never intended or imagined. Arminius deserves to be remembered as one of history's most brilliant military strategists, and one of the most effective resistance leaders who ever lived. but he should also be understood as a man whose greatest triumph helped create problems that would haunt European civilization for centuries. Sound familiar? It should, because these same complexities face every generation of leaders who must make crucial decisions about war, peace, and the defense of their people's values and independence. The specific circumstances change, but the fundamental challenges remain the same. How do you resist domination without creating worse problems? How do you preserve what you value without destroying what others have built? How do you fight for immediate objectives without losing sight of long-term consequences? These are the questions that Arminius's story forces us to confront. Not because his example provides easy answers, but because his experience demonstrates how difficult and important these questions really are. So I have to ask you, Teutoburg, do you think Arminius made the right choice? Was Germanic independence worth the centuries of warfare that followed? Could there have been a better way to resist Roman expansion while preserving the benefits of Roman civilization? Which historical leader do you believe faced similar challenges and handled them more successfully? And what lessons from this ancient battle feel most urgently relevant to conflicts and challenges in our own time? What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Because these questions about resistance, independence, and the unintended consequences of even the most justified actions are just as important today as they were 2,000 years ago in the forests of Germania, the battle that changed the world in just 3 days, and the man whose brilliant victory created problems that lasted for centuries. That's the incredible complex legacy of Arminius and the Battle of Teutoburg Forest.